So how are these life choices working out for you, New Yorkers? We all make them. We all have a choice in this country, at least as of today we do. Where we live, the type of life we pursue. Living on top of each other in overcrowded cities. You see, that has some pluses to it, and that has some minuses to it. Very recently, you have learned the hard way about the minuses. But instead of just accepting that, you've tried to blame it on the world. You're partially right. I truly believe, based on the evidence now looking back, February, March, most of April, we can pinpoint who really did this and what the real cause of this was. And I'd like to cover that in today's video. You know, there's this story out about Alyssa Milano and this nonsense in politics and her endorsement of Joe Biden. And honestly, all I feel when I see this girl is sad. I don't feel angry. I don't feel upset. I just feel sad for her. Because I don't think she was born evil. I don't even think that she would have, if she could do it over again, would choose the life she's chosen. This is where I think she's coming from and why it's related. I truly believe this woman thinks all men, all of us, are perverts. That we're all just a bunch of disgusting, filthy sex maniacs. And so she has a choice choosing between one that will destroy the earth, Donald Trump, and one that will attempt to save it, Joe Biden. She's not forgiving him. She's just condemning all of us. Because I see it in my comments all the time about a picture of a girl in a bra or a picture of a girl in a one-piece bathing suit and how it tweaks so many. It's a form of conditioning because that's who the real enemy is. Heterosexual, Caucasian, Christian men, generally speaking, and women to some extent. We are teaching an entire generation of kids that this is dangerous, that this kind of activity is possibly deadly. It's going to have an effect. And when you look at the overall effect of everything that's happened, it's very clear who the enemy is, who caused this, where it came from. 70 years ago, this was the warning about nuclear weapons. But the new enemy, the one that caused this, this has the environmentalists' movement's fingerprints all over it. Look at the effect. They are anti-meat, all of them. All of them. And we are now culling huge herds, meat shortages, collapsing that industry. Oil, that industry is teetering on the brink of total collapse around the world. Another one of their goals. Heavy industry around the world has shut down. The pollution from that is nearly gone. Planes have left the skies. Just about every one of these people's goals has been met with this. It has been an unmitigated success for these extremists. And I'd like to share with you also an article from a guy that wrote about this years ago and said it was coming and how they would do it. People forget that science has been wrong, epically wrong before, and the price has been tens of millions of lives. I'd like to read this article for you real quick, just so everyone can be reminded of this. I'm sure you guys know what I'm talking about. Environmentalists claim the moral high ground. Their interests are in preserving our precious planet, protecting defenseless animals, ensuring our children have clean water to drink and air to breathe. Yet environmentalists' policies have been a much more mixed bag in terms of their actual consequences. Sorry about that. Indisputably, many regulations and initiatives have reduced pollution, improved air, water quality to the benefit of everyone, but other environmental efforts have backfired, some with truly disastrous consequences. DDT, pesticide, came into use during World War II, helped eliminate malaria, a disease that many have alleged has killed half of everyone who has ever lived on the planet. That's how deadly it was and how ancient it is. The chemist who discovered DDT's efficacy was given a Nobel Prize. However, in 1962, environmentalist Rachel Carson wrote Silent Spring, which, ready for the word here, hypothesized that the chemical was causing cancer and destroying wildlife. In 1972, DDT was banned in the US and ultimately worldwide. As a result of the ban, malaria remained a plague in many poor countries, particularly in Africa. As of 2006, malaria was the biggest killer in Uganda, accounting for more than 1 in 5 deaths in the country's hospitals and killing more than 100,000 children under 5 years old annually. Annually. At that time, Uganda announced that it would begin using DDT indoors, despite threats from the European Union that such a move could lead to a ban on certain agricultural imports, meaning if you do this, we're going to bankrupt you. Fortunately, in September 2006, the WHO announced a change in policy. It now recommends DDT for indoor use to fight malaria. Now, this was a different time. Dr. Anarfi Asamoah explained the scientific and programmatic evidence clearly supports this reassessment. Indoor residual spraying is useful to quickly reduce the number of infections caused by malaria-carrying mosquitoes. So during the decades in which DDT was not used, when the world bowed to undoubtedly well-intentioned environmental activists, 50 million people, mostly children, died. Because the science was wrong. Because it wasn't science. It was emotionalism. And there are articles. This is one from Wesley J. Smith, January 25th, 2013, talking about how these people hate humanity. There's a self-loathing that lives in these people that they would have absolutely no problem sacrificing for the greater good. You see, this is why I brought up the picture of Milano. This is the calculation she's making in her head. They're both evil. Now, I believe both the parentheses R and parentheses D, both to be evil as well. But not because they're white, cisgender, giant air quotes, they're men. And perverts. Are there perverts? Sure. Absolutely. In DC and Hollywood? Oh, yeah. This girl has been the victim of them from the time she could literally walk. And you have to remember that, too. She was a child. Thrown into that environment, thrown to these wolves. With no choice. So believe me, she could speak to things that would probably shock many of you. There's another guy named Malthus who also predicted this. That no matter what, at some point, population would exceed our ability to feed it. And now we are finding what, plastic in pasta? This is something he probably couldn't have foreseen in 1798, that there would be forces that would introduce garbage into the food supply just to fill people's bellies. It was beyond his scope of things to be able to predict. But it's funny about the assumptions of the Malthusian catastrophe. All the way down here, passion between the sexes is necessary and will remain unchanged. Something else he couldn't have predicted: the ability of a mainstream global media to demonize heterosexuality, to demonize the idea of looking at a pretty girl, of, oh, pardon me, a white heterosexual male looking at a pretty girl. You see, that's the evil. This is from September 1, 2008. Are these things coming true? You betcha they are. They weren't in 08, but they are now in 20. And this is just a chart talking about how the population in billions was, it looks like 1900 was a little over a billion, and now we're 7 times that in 100 years. Positive checks to population growth are not of their own volition getting the job done, apparently. But look at the first one that's listed: disease. This is a combination of bioethicism and eugenics and environmentalists all wrapped up in one. Now, the article that I talked about, very beginning, this is it. This guy nailed it almost perfectly. Give me 1 second to find the best line here. What is not seen are the countless human lives they have taken, meaning environmentalists, by depriving third world people access to the electricity that Western environmentalists take for granted. Those people remain mired in poverty, darkness, wretched sanitation, and the resulting diseases and malnutrition that take millions of lives each year. Thanks to environmental movement, these hapless people's Hobbesian existence will remain nasty, brutish, and short, yet few will ever attribute their enduring miseries to environmentalism. Few will link the next plague, famine, or disaster back to the green culprits living in New York or Washington. Sound familiar? Few will link the next plague, famine, or disaster back to green culprits living in New York or Washington. The chain of causes and effects seems too difficult to trace. Difficult, but not impossible. And here he talks about the French heat waves deaths, which takes me back to this picture. You see, the idea of living in a city is an environmentalist's dream, because everybody is sharing resources all the time and living this hyper-efficient lifestyle, not realizing the cost. New York just paid it. But they're going to make the rest of us pay it now, because they can never admit it was their fault. They can never admit that they contaminated this country. No one is doing that study. No one is seeing how many fleeing, contaminated New Yorkers contaminated the rest of the country. I'm personally going to start calling it the New York virus, because as far as North Americans are concerned, it might as well be the New York virus, because that's where it came from. A couple days ago, Governor DeSantis of Florida confirmed it, that our state, was seeded by New Yorkers. And that's just fact. So I will leave that there. I'm sure that's probably going to cause a great deal of controversy down in the comments, but it is what it is. And when you look at the effects of this, the closing of businesses, the social distancing, the meat industry collapsing, the oil industry collapsing, all of this is environmentalists gone nuts. Environmentalists and bioethicists gone nuts. Like, share, subscribe.